Hello, everyone. Welcome to our 3 p.m. Eastern session of CME Palooza. Let me roll up the slides for everyone to see. This is our afternoon snack session sponsored by PER. This is our Grants Hotline reopened. We did a Grants Hotline session a couple years ago, and so we have reopened the hotline for everyone. Our moderator today is Jim Palatine, president of PER and PTCE. Also want to mention all of the questions today from the hotline were submitted from various participants and those in the community. A while ago, you have a chance to send in more questions if you would like to. That would be fine. And I also want to mention that Suzette Miller from GenMab was supposed to be on the panel, but she is not feeling too well and not able to join. So there is a very special guest joining in her place, me. Just not, I'm sure you all need to hear from me talk again, but for those of you who don't know, in my day job, I do work at Pfizer, so I guess I do have a little bit of perspective on some of these questions. So I will be chiming in from time to time. Okay, before I turn things over to Jim, of course, a big thank you to all of our sponsors, our gold sponsors, Daiichi Sankyo, MedLearning Group, and of course, thank you to PER for this particular session. Silver sponsors, ACHL, Academic CME, Antidote Education Company, Catamount Medical Education, DKB Med, Hippocrates, Helio CME, Medscape Education, Integrity CE, Platform Q Health Education, Prova Education, RedMed Ed, Vindico Medical Education, and our bronze sponsors, Answers in CME, AXDev, Bonum Continuing Education, Creative Educational Concepts, CMEology, Excalibur Medical Education, Global Education Group, Infograph Ed, MedIQ, last slide of sponsors, PACE, Paradigm Medical Communications, Postgraduate Institute for Medicine, PrimeEd, PVI, RMEI Medical Education, and Right Medicine. Also, shout out to Talem Health for sponsoring our CME Palooza Spectacular Challenge last week. Hopefully we will do that again in the spring. 3 different ways that you can ask questions. You can use our CME Outfitters text line at 267-666-0CME. You can tweet your questions using the CME Palooza hashtag, and you can use the YouTube chat function as well if you're watching on YouTube, or you can click on that watch on YouTube button on the screen and go to YouTube to watch. Use the chat that way. Poll Everywhere. We are not using Poll Everywhere for this particular session, but I do want to give acknowledgement to Broadcast Speed Studio for sponsoring the poll for the other sessions. So thank you to them for that. And last thing before I turn things over to Jim, that all opinions, discussions, and or conclusions expressed are those of our panelists and me, and do not represent an endorsement by or position of their employer, its parent company, or affiliates. So with that, I will turn things over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Derek. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim Palatine. I am president of PTCE and PER. For those of you that knew Phil Talamo as president of PER, Phil's moved into a different role within our organization, an exciting role around the mergers, acquisitions, and innovation. So he and I have worked for many years together, and we continue to collaborate just in a different role and different capacity. So we're excited for his new position. Our panel today, we have expert panel. I'm excited to be moderating, thrilled to be part of this. I do want to ask them to go around and introduce themselves, and then I will ask questions that have come in through the Grants Hotline over the past few months. And as Derek said, there's other ways to communicate today. If you want to YouTube it, you want to text it, or you can also just tweet it. So let's see if we can get as many questions as possible. And with that, let's ask Sylvia to introduce herself. All right. You want to start maybe Alexa?
Sorry, I was muted too. Let's move on.
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Alexa. I am the lead for IME grants at Jazz Pharmaceuticals, specifically the oncology therapeutic areas.
All right, Lori.
Sure, I'll jump in here. Hi, my name is Lori Carpenter. I'm an associate director here at CGen, leading our grants team for all disease state areas, mainly oncology.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you, Alexa. And we'll get Sylvia up to on in a minute here. So we'll start off with the first question. So the first question, since this is the snack time session, you said it's a snack time session, right, Derek?
Right.
The first question is going to Alexa. So first question, I'd like to know your top 3 pet peeves when reviewing a grant submission, or top 3 pet peeves of a grant. But before you say that, what is your favorite snack?
Goldfish, definitely. And most importantly, always goldfish. So my 3 pet peeves. One would be if the healthcare gap listed in a grant proposal includes lack of knowledge and competence. So that's actually not a healthcare gap. A healthcare gap really is what is not happening at the point of patient care that should be happening. It should outline a specific issue at the point of patient care. So that's one. A recycled grant proposal. So I can tell if a provider is submitting the same grant over and over and just changing the title, or submitting an agenda that is for a program targeting nurses, for example, and I've already seen the same exact agenda for a separate program targeting physicians. So you really want to make sure that the grant proposal addresses a specific need for a specific target audience, and that you're not recycling the same grants or the same agendas over and over. So that's it. That's my second. And then the last, when providers fiddle with the start date to try to get around that 60-day rule and then ask us to update the date later. So that makes it really difficult for us to review the grant in line with our processes and our timeline. So it sometimes can take longer than 60 days. So that can become a challenge. Those would be my 3.
Thank you so much. Love the goldfish also. Lori, 3 pet peeves of a proposal, but first, the favorite snack.
Okay.
Hey, Jim, hold on 1 second. Sorry, hold on.
Test
Sylvia, I think we got you now.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
We got you. Can you hear us now?
Some more feedback.
Okay, I think we're good. All right.
Yeah.
We can go on with Lori.
Okay, Lori, you're on.
Okay, so favorite snack is probably caramel pop, but I don't eat it a lot because it's bad for you. And then I think for pet peeves, I think talking about the unmet need and making sure that we're meeting that on some level is really important. So I look at that unmet need. I think the date changing and that can be a challenge because the start date is the start date. And sometimes it'll be, I think it's happening at a certain time. And then people are like, well, we didn't get funding. So now it's 6 months delayed. And I mean, that's a lot. That's a lot of time. So, we're willing to kind of stretch that start date, but like if we can get it as close as possible to the actual start date and then updating your information in our system, which I know is hard to do because you guys have multiple systems to go in into and update. But when I'm presenting and saying like, okay, these things are supposed to start next month, and then I get told, a week before, the start date, like, oh no, we're actually changing it. That makes you and me look bad, right? So that's a pet peeve. And then I think not having enough information in that agenda, those agendas we really pour through, we're looking at, we're trying to imagine in our heads what the sessions are going to look like and what the flow is going to be and how you're meeting, you talked about the unmet need. Is it getting met in here? Are the learning objectives getting met in this session? So the more information, the better. It just helps. So sometimes I get agendas that are like, 7 lines, and that doesn't give me enough to know what this grant is about, right? So those are, I don't know, 2.5.
Oh, that was three. We're
Okay,
counting.
good. Great. And then I'll hand it off to Sylvia.
Sylvia, can
Thank you.
introduce yourself, and then we'll go to the first question.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sylvia Nashid, Director of Medical Education at Bristol Myers Squibb. I cover cardiovascular and immunology. I have to apologize about the technical difficulties. My screen actually just completely went blank on me, so I'm now on my colleague's computer to continue. So, three top pet peeves that I have.
Well, before
One,
you start with your pet peeves,
yes.
what's your favorite? This is a snack time session. So what is your
Okay.
favorite snack?
Oh gosh, Doritos.
All
Doritos and some soda with it.
right, now three
So-
pet peeves of a proposal.
Sure thing. So one top pet peeve that I have is if I find any errors within the proposal. So
Mhm.
two types. One being a clinical error. If I see a clinical error within the proposal, then then you're going to go with a decline on that most likely. The second type of errors that's a pet peeve of mine is when I see just sloppy work, misspells, a sloppy copy and paste job. And I've been on the MEC side. I know that you copy and paste from different proposals, which is completely fine. But again, when I'm reviewing a cardiovascular grant and then all of a sudden it's talking about oncology or mentions oncology, it just looks like a sloppy job. And I know you have your editorial staff on board and your proofreading board. So we do expect that it at least goes through that rigorous process before submission. And also it kind of reflects on the organization too, because then it makes me think, what will, if we go with the support, what will some of the program materials look like? Will there be errors in the faculty slides if they're not thoroughly reviewed, or any of the materials that are putting out there? One other pet peeve I have is not having that program summary or highlights up front in a proposal. That's usually very important and helpful to me, just to kind of outline what are the learning objectives, what's the design of the program, what's the target audience, the reach, cost per learner, the accreditation, what level of outcomes we're getting to. So kind of helps me to know what I'm about to delve into, and also helps save me time. If, for example, I'm looking at the learning objectives and they're completely not aligned with our medical strategy, then I might not necessarily have to go through the entire proposal. I know that, I'm not going to be able to proceed with support. And then finally, proposals that are way too long. So sometimes I'll open up a proposal, 50, 60 pages, and be like, oh my gosh, so tedious for me to get through, and was tedious for you to put together, and a lot of work for you to put together. So just keep it on point and focused.
Thank you, Sylvia. And I'll continue on with a follow-up question. It actually comes up around needs assessments and the extent of clinical data that you want in a proposal when the needs assessment. Sylvia, you did say that if the data is wrong, that's a pet peeve. That's an out. How much data do we need, and how much of the clinical data do you really want to see, and especially in a therapeutic area with HER2 breast cancer, where there's could be 12 different drugs in this area. How much data you want to see? Data from each? What's the extent of that? And I'll kick that back around to Lori and Alexa too.
Sure. You want me to get started, Jim?
Yeah, you get started.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think for a needs assessment, it is essential to have some clinical data included in there. You need a lit search, and it really helps us identify whether you really have expertise in that therapeutic area. So that is important for us to assess. It's important for me to see, have you included, the latest evidence-based guidelines, for example, or if there was new clinical trial data, were you inclusive of that? Are you really up to date in this therapeutic area, or are you putting in outdated information? I also look at the references that you're putting into the needs assessment to see, are they up to date? So that's very important to have that lit search component and data component in it. If there's so many agents, though, I don't expect you to mention every agent. I don't expect you to delve into everything, or else we are going to reach that 50, 60 pages. That's a pet peeve of mine, right? So keep it succinct. Use your judgment on what should be included and what we would like to see and hear about. And then also you can generalize. So if it's a therapeutic class, you don't have to mention each product, but put maybe a general statement, include the citations, because like I said, we do look at the citations, and then that should be helpful enough. But in addition, needs assessment should not just be inclusive of a lit search, we do look for triangulation in needs assessments, and that's very important. So not just the lit search, but go above and beyond and at least have 3 data sources altogether, minimum, to be able to really justify that need. That lit search isn't sufficient. For example, have you used previous outcomes of a similar therapeutic area that you've done a program in and really assessed where are there still needs, where they're still having trouble, and putting that into your needs assessment? Have you maybe put out a survey to the target audience, and what were the results of that, putting that into your needs assessment? Or have you maybe had an interview with a thought leader to really assess what are the educational gaps and needs there? So that's something key that we look at, and not just the data.
Thank you, Sylvia. Lori, do you want to add on to that?
I don't know if I can. I think she covered it, but I agree with her. I think we're looking to see if you're doing your research, and we know if not. I won't mention names, but we get a lot of HER2 proposals in for maybe ADCs, like ADCs and HER2. That's great, but there are other agents that are non-ADCs that are also part of that. So if that's your title, then I want to see. Then I go to the references, because I'm like, how does this all fit? Are they going to talk about other things besides those drugs? Like what? Again, we're trying to imagine if we're sitting in this CME activity, what topics are going to be covered? What's the conversation going to be like? Is it going to be just deadpan didactic? Is it going to be covering everything, so that we're actually rounding out this it's a rounded educational opportunity. So references, like she said, not a ton of data in the user needs assessment per se, but like make sure that you're referencing things and you're making mention of things that are inclusive, right? Because we're also looking at that as well. Is it compliant? So there are those things too. So but she covered it. Like, have you done surveys? How are you getting your information? Where are you getting your information? Did you come up with this out of out of a hat, or like where is this information coming from? Because our user needs are like something that we look at too, and we're putting together that on the back end, and we're talking to we're having ad boards, we're talking to our field teams and seeing what's out there and who's confused on what, and does that match what we're finding too? And that's why I like having conversations with providers as well, because I think that's where you're like, okay, well, what are you finding out there? Great. Well, then your educational material makes sense. And yeah, we're seeing the same thing. So that's alignment. So yeah.
That's helpful. And Alexa, anything to add?
Definitely agree with what they both said. For me, it's really not only about the clinical data. I mean, we really can't support a program if the data is not up to date, there's not updated references, and if you're not aware of the recent guidelines and so on. But I don't personally like to see every agent in AML listed, and then the clinical data, and then an agent and the clinical data. It doesn't really show that, again, that you understand what actually is the problem at the point of patient care, what actually is the issue that you're trying to bridge through this education. So it's really important to, in addition to the clinical data, to also outline in the needs assessment, what is the clinical need? How do you know it exists? And I love, like what Sylvia said, having HCP surveys from previous programs, talking to KOLs. Those all show where the gaps are. And you really also want to make sure that your needs assessment ties to the agenda, ties to the target audience, and again, that specific need that you're trying to address through the education.
Thanks. And just as a follow-up, and we can go back around, but Alexa, you think about best practices for a needs assessment. You said it needs to have the survey and the literature search, past programs. How should that be organized, or what would you think? And when you think about a really, really good grant, how is that organized? Is it organized by specific learning objective, or is it organized by grouping? Here's all the surveys, here are all the KOL interviews. So how is what's the best practice that you've seen?
So I like to see those surveys, those KOL interviews tied to a specific gap that you identified. So you identify or first you do these surveys, right? You go out there and you try to figure out what is the problem. So you do these surveys, you talk to KOLs, and then you have very clearly in the needs assessment or somewhere in your grant proposal listed, this is the healthcare gap, and these are the root causes. So the root causes are actually why the healthcare gaps exist, and that would be, that's where you could put those surveys and those KOL interviews to kind of support why the healthcare gap exists and what it actually is. So I like to see it embedded in the needs assessment, but I also love to see in the beginning, like what Sylvia mentioned, like a summary, target audience, learning objectives, healthcare gap, root cause, all summarized at the top. That is awesome when I see that.
Sylvia, best practices, when you think about a really, really super grant, how is this all organized for you?
Yeah, I say I have to agree. I mean, I think it's based on the gaps and just listing out what are the educational gaps and needs, and then going through all the data components, the lit search, the faculty quotes, survey results, outcome results, having all of that come in together for that specific gap, and then moving on and breaking that down. And usually the gap aligns with the learning objectives that you have there. So seeing that all come together, I think that's the best way to format it.
I think Lori?
Yeah, I think my favorites are, again, I like to imagine what it's going to be like sitting in that room or being on that online, educational activity and listening or reading how it's going to flow, right? So I think some of the proposals that we've gotten in that I think are good are even those that list like questions that they're wondering about, which is sort of that user needs assessment, right? Like those are the questions you're trying to answer, the gap that you're trying to answer. So how is that going to flow through into the program? Like what questions are you trying to get answers for? What do you think the questions are that the KOLs have, or your learners that are coming to this have? I think it's difficult to I feel bad for the providers because we're all, I think, as pharmaceutical companies and those who have different products are getting a little more specified in what they're looking at. And like HER2 was a good one because there's a lot of companies that have HER2 positive breast cancer therapies out there. And so how do you show us what that conversation is going to look like? And what are the questions that people have out there? And how can we best respond to that? Because I think our whole thing here, well, at least my thing when I'm looking at it is like, how are we not going to cause harm? How are we going to make sure that people know what's out there, what's available, how to use it properly, so that we don't cause any harm and we're using it at the right patient at the right time, in the right way. So having that sort of flow again, I just want to know what it's going to be like before I say yes to something. Like you're trying to get as much information as you can, right? So I think that's helpful to have like those research questions that you may not have answers for, which is fine. But what are you trying to get at here?
That's great insight, Lori. Thank you. And so, Derek, we want to bring you into the loop here. So first, before you can speak, what is your favorite snack? Then I'd like to ask you a question.
Oh, okay. Favorite snack? Probably pretzels, which is boring, but I think it feels to me like it's healthy when it really probably isn't.
There's along with goldfish. It's okay.
But yeah, so pretzels. Okay.
Right. Derek, bring you in now. One key differentiator within a needs assessment that is just awesome when a provider does this.
Oh, boy, that's a good question. I don't know if there's one key differentiator for me. I think that I am maybe a little different than some in that for me, for the needs assessment, I don't want to say shorter is better. That's not quite accurate, but I prefer a concise needs assessment. Pfizer is RFP based, which means we also we have limits on the page amount of pages that can be in a proposal. It's 15 pages, so it's already going to be fairly short, which means I don't have Sylvia's issue, fortunately, because that would drive me insane. I can't even imagine how you do that. But at 15 pages, there's a lot of info that has to plug in there. So I think most of us who work there too sort of take the approach that, let us, in the needs assessment, we want to make sure that you know what you're talking about more or less, but you don't have to tell us everything. Give us a nice, concise overview, and then move on. And then for me, it's the program description. I would sacrifice a little bit from the needs assessment in order to give a lengthier program description. I want to know what you're planning to do. And that's the area, to me, that tends to be lacking as opposed to the needs assessment. So the differentiator for me would be a needs assessment that is thorough but concise, and then leaves room for a decent program description.
So we'll go to Sylvia. You heard Derek's differentiator, and Pfizer does limit you as to the number of pages. And what is, what's your feeling about the abbreviated needs assessment versus not? You've talked about the data being correct, talked about listing the data, which, is now a bigger lift for a needs assessment. So how do you feel about the abbreviated needs assessment versus the longer one?
Yeah, I'm okay with getting an abbreviated needs assessment, but to be honest, I do like to see the full needs assessment too. And I know some providers in their proposal, they'll put that abbreviated one and then they'll put a separate attachment with the full needs assessment. Again, I do like to see the full needs assessment just to really assess, do they know what they're talking about? Do they have the latest references, et cetera, et cetera. If you're able to do that in a more abbreviated form, great. There are some areas where you can do that as long as you put enough information that's really justifying to us that you understand this area and that you have the latest scientific evidence in there. That's most important, and where you're focusing, your educational needs and gaps and what you're going to be discussing in the program. I think that's most important. Completely agree with Derek. I think the program descriptions are extremely important. That's something that we really do focus on, and they are sometimes lacking. And if I had opportunity to go beyond the 3 pet peeves, I think that was going to be one of them, that having a more robust description of the design of the program is very important to us. And I don't like to have to go back with an RFI and can you give me more information? What do you mean by this? Can you get into that a little bit more?
And Alexa, you did bring up the importance of data being correct. And if you have an abbreviated needs assessment, sometimes you may not be able to assess how well this company knows the therapeutic area. So are you a fan of a shorter needs assessment or a longer one to vet out people that may not have all the details?
I'll say that I really don't have a preference. So I've seen awesome needs assessments in 2 pages. I've read through 10 pages of a needs assessment and have found what I was looking for in 1 paragraph. So as long as you're, again, addressing the healthcare gap, addressing the root cause, outlining the needs, and have updated data, updated guidelines, you really don't need 15 pages. There is a way to do it. There is a way to do it in a shorter way. So I really don't have a preference. I've seen great long needs assessments, and I've seen great, really short ones too.
That's good to hear, because as a provider, sometimes you worry about the need to put in more information and make sure that you demonstrate that you have background in this area. And if you put a abbreviated needs assessment in, you don't want to feel that it's too short. And so, Lori, what's your feeling about the abbreviated and all of the data into a needs assessment? Is that something that you would find? Would you rule out a company if they came in with a really short needs assessment?
Really short needs assessment, I mean, as long as it's to the point and short and concise and makes sense, that's one thing. But I think, again, then I'm looking at those references to make sure that you've used the right references in there, and again, what the latest and greatest is, and you make sure that you have that included. I think the other piece that we haven't really touched on yet is that target audience piece, where who are you targeting? How are you going to get to these people? what is your distribution like plan, right? So I also look at that, because you can have the best educational activity in the world with all the bells and whistles, like you're doing all the right things, and it could be really fascinating, and yet we're not reaching anybody. And so like that's not really going to do any good if you're not reaching that target learner. So I do look at that too, of like how are they planning on reaching these people? Who are these people? Or how do they, we've had a few grand rounds come in, and so like how are you selecting these hospitals that you're going to, and why, right? What's it based on? So like just knowing that is really helpful, as well as, the user needs assessment is great. I think that's an opening too for a discussion. I don't love going out with RFIs, but if I have to say, hey, can I, clarify your user needs, that's one thing. But the references are going to help you with that. If you have a short user needs, I expect it's a long reference list.
Okay, that's a great point.
And just to add to that, just quickly, the target audience, you'll want to think about that when you're writing the needs assessment too. So if you have a needs assessment that's outlining all the therapy options and all the guidelines, but you're trying to create a program on identifying or treating adverse events, it doesn't really match up. So you want to think about the target audience and the actual scope of the program when you're writing the needs assessment.
No, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Derek, we're going to pitch a question to you. And this comes from an accreditor that partners with a medical education company that we assume is not accredited. So your RFP deadline is looming. The accreditor gets the proposal from the MEC. It's in really, 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 really bad shape. They're not going to hit the deadline to get it revised. The accreditor has a good reputation with Pfizer, and so they don't want to risk that submission really damaging that relationship. What do you recommend doing? Is there a right answer on this? What do you recommend for the accreditor? Should they go ahead and submit this and hope to get a call later with you, or just swallow it and say, you know what, we do it another time?
I'm going to answer this two different ways, which I guess is probably cheating, but it's my conference. I can do it.
That's why you get this question. It's your conference. You get this question.
Right, exactly. So first of all, the first way I'll answer it is how you asked it, and that I would say, if it is really poorly written, then no, I probably would not submit it, because I forget, one of you mentioned on your pet peeves, maybe it was you, Sylvia, I forget, about how well something is written or mistakes or that kind of a thing as being a big pet peeve. And that is something I had on my list as well. For me, it does matter. Like the way your proposal is formatted, not that I need like nice and flowery, whatever, but well formatted. If I look at something, I'm like, ooh, it's just like blocks of text, hard to read, errors in it, whatever. That does affect my opinion. I feel like it does reflect on the quality of work that you do. I guess I see a proposal as an extension of the work that you'll be doing on a program that I might be funding. So yeah, I guess I would say if it's poorly written that way, I maybe would not even submit it. The second part of that, how I was going to answer, is if there wasn't the deadline piece of it, it came to you and you would just submit it. I would say, edit it yourself. Don't just submit something once you receive it from. I mean, I understand how the partnership works between an organization and, whether it's a MEC or some other who maybe is actually putting the proposal together. At Pfizer, and others as well, I'm sure, but it has to be the accredited provider who submits a proposal. So we understand maybe you aren't actually the one who developed the proposal yourself. Maybe you're part of it. Someone else actually wrote it. That's fine. That's understandable. But if it comes to you and you read it and you're like, oh, this is not good, then I would say, no, don't just submit it. Send it back or edit it yourself, for sure. Because again, to me, it does reflect on the quality of work that I would expect
They send it to you to edit.
They send it to me to edit, then it goes.
All right.
Although I have been known to edit other things, so.
Right, yeah, I know Sylvia doesn't want to edit that one either. So
No, probably not.
okay, let's go into the decision. Questions around the decision process, and we'll do a quick rapid fire. And what components of a proposal are viewed favorably or neutral? Let's say. Go to Lori first. Many CME, CE programs have accreditation with commendation. Is that a favorable viewed upon or neutral within a proposal?
That's a good question. I mean, I think, being somewhat of a smaller company, we look for people who have a lot of experience. So the commendations are great, but if I've never ever heard of you or seen anything, I'm going to be like, well, okay, they're good, but like this is new, so we're probably not going to go give you like the full crazy amount that you're asking for, but we might want to test you out. Like we're not, so that would be, I guess, one thing. I think, again, what we look at is if we're sitting in the room, what is that educational, or we're taking this educational activity, what is that going to look like, right? So give us a feel for how this is going to flow and be, and what you guys are going to talk about. And that comes from all the things we've already discussed: the user needs assessment, the learning objectives, the agendas, kind of those research questions that you think people want to know about. That's what we would look at. So I would say the more favorable, why I mentioned agendas is because the more detail you can give there, we are more likely to review that in all seriousness and have a bigger, broader discussion. I think our grants team reviews first, and we dig in, sort of like I would think Sylvia and Alexa do. And then sometimes I bring that to our medical directors, and I actually have to like summarize that for them, right? So anything that you can do to make my job easier, which is have a lot of detail, and imagine yourself sitting in that room and what this educational activity is going to look like if someone's sitting at their computer. That's really helpful.
Thank you. And Sylvia, question for you about favorability. How about partnerships? Neutral or favorable when you see those partnerships in a grant?
Partnerships we view as favorable. I think it's always good to have, maybe a medical society or an advocacy group partnering along with the MEC and bringing together the proposal and implementing the proposal, and maybe extending the reach out. So definitely look at that favorably.
Yeah. And there's a lot of discussion at the last conference about patient education and patient education components. And, and Sylvia, back to you, favorable, neutral, and then what do you recommend as far as how those are delivered to the patient? Is it something that we deliver digitally or something in print format? What do you recommend?
Yeah, so it's definitely favorable, and it is something that may differentiate one proposal from another. If you're coming with the same format that you have, an additional patient component, it's definitely a differentiator and may have us go ahead with the support. Of course, it has to have that HCP educational part. That's not the only thing. That's our main focus of HCP education. But when you have that patient component or patient voice incorporated, whatever patient materials, patient voice incorporated into the actual education, patient materials or resources that the HCP can actually use within practice to help educate their patients or prescribe it, if you will, to them. So it could be print resources that they can hand out to them and help them, or that, if they have a poster that they could put up in their office to help speak to their patients about their disease state and treatment and adherence, and, to kind of support shared decision making. That's always a plus. And then if there's online resources that they could refer their patients to as well, it could be a mix of any of those really, but it's definitely viewed very favorably.
Lori, how about for you? Favorably, neutral?
So it brings in two questions, right? Because it is super favorable, and I would love to see more of that, because I think it's really helpful, especially when you're talking about, HCPs being able to give their patients information. We've heard from a lot of community oncologists and nurses, that is really important. They lack that. And so how can we help? But I know that raises the cost. So then you're stuck in that, okay, well, now I have this really expensive program and I know you like multi-support. So how do I fit that in? So I feel for the providers. I really do. And when we review things, I definitely try to bring the provider perspective to it, because I also worked at another large granting organization. As you know, I have a background at the Gates Foundation. And it was like, I felt for these grantees, but I don't know what to tell you. Like, yes, I want multi-support, I want cheap, and I want patient in there and partnerships, but I know there's a balance there. So yeah, I don't know, Godspeed.
So the takeaway is if you can balance it, so it's favorable, just try to balance it. Unfavorable if it's, $1 trillion.
Yes.
All right. Question came in from a small nonprofit group about communication and the communication about declines. And summarize this message is that we're a small group. We put a lot of time, a lot of effort, a lot of money spent into developing a proposal, and we submit it, and it's declined without any type of detailed information. I mean, declined because of budget, declined because of a reason that it's really hard to get. How do you, or what do you recommend? And it says specifically, what do you recommend for us little guys in the CME world that are known for putting out quality education, but are unable to secure funding? How do we, how do they get information from you? And we'll, let's ask Sylvia.
Sure. So first, I want to say I feel for them. I understand having come from the MEC side. I do know it's a tremendous effort to pull these proposals together and have to go through the submission process. And it is very disappointing and frustrating when you keep getting decline after decline. So I'm sorry that you're going through that. From our end, you do have to keep in mind that we do have limited budgets. And I know the question, they had mentioned that a lot of their declines come in with limited budget and they're not getting much information beyond that. But the majority of the cases is because we have limited funding. Each therapeutic area has its own budget that we can't go over. So I know it's hard to believe. Some people think, oh my God, pharma, they can get, whatever programs they want and have all of the money, but we don't. We are limited. And so the majority is because of budgetary reasons. One thing I would like to say is that you can, within our organization, you can reach out to our therapeutic area specialist who reviewed your proposal if you wanted to get, additional information of why it was declined. I know the question that had come through, they were wondering, that they reach out, but they don't really know, where they went off if it's outside of budget. So you can reach out to us and we can discuss with you, the proposal and why we declined it if it was really outside of the budget declines. One other thing I'd like to say is that in our organization within cyber grants, when we do come to decline a grant, we do have declination codes that we can check mark. And so we can send that out. So when you receive the declination letter, you will have a budget. You'll have a bullet or two that kind of outlines the reason. Budget may be one of them, but there's many other reasons, like maybe the needs assessment wasn't robust, like maybe you didn't triangulate, or the learning objectives weren't aligned with our medical strategy, or the target audience isn't who we're looking to educate on. So a lot of different reasons. Another is that maybe we gave you a proposal before and you proceeded with it, but you didn't really execute on it the way you said in the proposal, or the outcomes weren't up to par. So a lot of different reasons why they may be declines. We can always discuss that with them. Not that I expect everybody that got a decline to then inundate my my email inbox. So definitely not the point, but I know it's a smaller organization that was asking if they could reach out to somebody. So I'm saying we are accessible. And then one thing to keep in mind is that we do get so many proposals, hundreds of proposals coming through, right? And with the limited budgets we only have like a 10% approval rate. So keep that in mind. You will get a lot of declines coming through from us just based on the volumes that we're getting and the limitations that we do have. So hope that helps.
Oh, good. So if the company has a 50% approval rate, they're in good shape.
Well, we have a 10% approval.
Right. That's what I mean. So
If they get 50% from what
Yeah.
they're submitting, that's
yeah,
excellent.
they're very thoughtful. That's good.
Oh.
Okay. Let's skip to a question about innovation, and I know Lori brought it up about innovation drives costs up potentially, and all the really innovation can really have things be expensive. Let's talk about innovation with respect to our learners. And, sometimes you potentially can out innovate the learners. The learners need something easy to access, easy to use. And if we introduce a new, really, really, really innovative platform for them, it takes them time to figure it out. And participation may not be as high as we anticipated, because it just takes our learners some time to figure it out. Give me your idea on innovation and innovation in conjunction with learners and learner styles. And we'll go with Alexa on this one to start.
Sure. So I think a lot of the times when we hear the word innovation, we think 3D or virtual reality, or the learner has to put on, their 3D glasses and watch all these animations. That's not really what we're getting at when we talk about innovation, really what's best for the learner. So when I think about innovation, I think about programs that work, that keep the learners engaged from start to finish, that keep the learners able to actually use what they just learned during the activity, answer questions throughout the activity, really start to think about their actual practice. Programs that are truly engaging and moving away from the 1 hour videos where you can kind of just walk away and the video will just keep going on in the background. So when you think about innovation, think about really keeping the learner engaged. And that doesn't always have to be really expensive. So it doesn't always have to be these types of formats that could be actually distracting to the learner, as long as it actually works and the learner's watching the full program and actually getting something out of it.
That's great insight. Lori.
Yeah, I mean what she said, but I think that engagement is hard to get, right? And especially when you're covering so much. Like, we see a lot of the hour-long webinars. How are you keeping people engaged in that? I mean, I would cruise through and then answer the questions at the end, right? Like, I think of it from a perspective of like how much time I have during the day. And, I also have HCP friends. And I'm like, well, how do you get your education? I'm constantly asking, like, my doctors love it when I show up for appointments. I'm like, so what CME did you do? Where did you get it? And just talking to them about it, because I'm always curious about how people do that. I'm so busy during the day. I can't imagine going home and then having to like listen to something or do CME, and they do it outside their work hours. Right. So thankfully doctors do it outside of their work hours and try to stay up to date. But how do we make that easier on people? And again, I think keeping learners engaged, those downloadable materials, like completers are great. I would love it if everybody would take an activity and complete it. But it's also the participants, right? Because I would go in and print something and then look at it later, or pull it out when I had a patient that had that particular need. So innovation does not have to be AI, 3D goggles, patient simulation type things. It can just be engaging someone. I mean, and I've watched things too where like the video stops and you have to answer a question before you can go on, and it annoys me, but at the same time I'm engaged. So how do we get more of that? And then also testing them later, or reaching out later to make sure that education has like sunk in. Basically, do you still know what you knew when you took it, right?
That's a great point. Sylvia, do you have anything to add to that as well?
Sure. So I think the goal of the education is very important for the MEC to assess. And if it's simple of just, straight through, you want to get new evidence-based guidelines down for the HCPs, then simple didactic is completely fine. But if it's more a hands-on skill that you want them to achieve, then you might have to have, a more expensive, innovative type program that is more hands-on, or, a workshop. Or if you're looking, for them to gain competence and being able to apply something in their practice, maybe you want to do, a case simulation So different designs, it really depends on what the goal of the education is and what you're trying to get across to them. I think that's important to keep in mind. And lately what we're seeing of some of more innovative type programs that it seems is being picked up more by HCPs are some of those microburst learnings and some education that's using social media. So we also look for that. I know there's cost associated with it, but I think some of them are still within reason and are more attractive, especially to the younger HCPs out there.
That's great insight. Derek, do you want to chime in about your preferences or your feeling about innovation, and what do you look for?
I'm trying to think of something that's different than what they've already shared, which has been great. The only thing I would add in, always happy to see new and innovative ideas come along, is that we will at times, especially if we start to see something showing up in proposals, and I say we, I just mean the team at Pfizer, we don't often do a lot of capabilities presentations or whatever you want to call them, but we have brought in, there's been some things that have come along. We've been like, we want to know more about this. We recognize that this is not an area that we have expertise in. And so we will at times ask groups to come in and give a presentation on that. So that does still happen, not a lot, but it does on occasion. And so I think for me, it's always about whether or not what you are adding in is adding value to the program that you have. Because I think too often we see these different things, whether it's gamification or virtual reality or whatever it may be, that becomes a hot new thing, and then it starts getting added to every proposal that comes along. I should say every, but a lot. And it becomes like, why is this even in here? I don't understand how this is, other than making it more expensive. So for me, it is about the value that it is adding. And so if you can define what that value is, that will go a long way towards us looking at it favorably.
Well, thanks, Derek. And Derek, I forgot that. Are we supposed to be eating snacks while we're doing this? Is that?
I mean, you could have. I think it's more for the audience to be eating snacks. It's a little annoying if you're chewing on peanuts.
That's true. I'm not saying I would be eating snacks.
We could make that a whole session sometime and just warn people ahead of time. This is what's happening.
Right. I hope everyone's enjoying their snack. We have about a couple minutes, 3 minutes.
3 minutes.
3 minutes left. And so we'll go back to the panel and start with Alexa, just to summarize in a few words, just important takeaways for those of us on the next side, on the accreditation side. What do you say?
So in summary, I've mentioned this a lot during the session, but making sure that whatever program you're doing is addressing a legitimate healthcare gap and a legitimate problem within patient care. Without that, if you haven't identified that, it might be really difficult to put on a successful program.
All right, Sylvia, summarize.
So I think the most important point is just consider us partners. I know we're independent of the education that we support, but you rely on us for the support. We rely on you for really coming out with and developing robust, valuable, evidence-based, and fair balanced education that'll really help close the HCP gaps and ultimately impact patient care, right? So I think the key takeaway here is really understand your audience, really put out quality proposals. It's not the quantity, but the quality. You don't have to do a data dump. We're looking for quality proposals and really understanding those needs and the gaps and how your target audience would like to get their education. And then one thing that we didn't mention much is outcomes too. So outcomes reporting is extremely important to us. It really helps demonstrate the value of IME when we get those reports. And so please, be on time in submitting those and be on point in submitting those, because those metrics and the gains in knowledge and competence and the additional gaps that remain really helps us when we're presenting to our medical matrix teams.
All right, thank you. And Lori, wrap us up with, what do you say to take away the few summary words to take away?
Yeah, I mean, what they said. Plus, I think it is important to design a program for the audience that it's intended to go to. So much of the time we see like these broad sweeping programs and we're like, but we're out of that broad stage, right? Like we're like everything that was new in bladder came out 2 years ago. We should be past like at the beginning of time. Here's how bladder cancer began. And it's like, okay, we're ready to move on to the next thing. Or if you're doing a nursing targeted, we're looking for like practical approaches and what they're going to see and how adverse events, because they're going to be dealing with that patient one-on-one. How do you make it easy on your audience? What's the format? If I'm your audience, what am I going to see? Right? Like I always like the walkthrough of like, take me to that program. What's it really going to look like to you? And how do we make it easy for that end user? And is there any materials that we can hand out? And then outcomes. I like the faster we can get those turned around, that's great. I have a meeting with my people once a month. I can share those. Those are looked on favorably. We definitely take that into account when we're reviewing grants again. And we're saying, oh, they had really good outcomes last time. Or they'll ask, hey, how does this provider do? And we can reflect back on that, and we do. So that's something else to keep in mind.
Well, thank you. Alexa, Lori, Sylvia, fantastic insights. You saw me looking down a lot of time. I was writing notes as you're going for our own organization, and I appreciate the insights. Always very helpful. And Derek, great job pulling us all together. CME Palooza is phenomenal. Sign us up to continue to sponsor program, and great job. Thanks for including us.
You heard that, everyone. Jim just committed to a super mega sponsorship for CME Palooza. So
I did. I know what I was doing.
Well, thank you, Jim, for filling in as well. I know you got pulled in this slightly last second. So great job. Thank you, everyone on our panel. Great session. A lot of nice feedback. People are submitting questions now. It's a little late, everyone. But anyway, let me bring up our slides. Great panel. Let me finish this up with a reminder to take our survey if you have a moment. It's right on the live tab of our website. We do like having your feedback, especially on topics of interest for upcoming sessions or upcoming Paloozas. So that's always helpful to know. Reminder that we still have our CME Palooza scavenger hunt going on for the rest of the time here. You can click on the Broadcast Beat Studio link and go to their website and look for the CME Palooza logo. And to view the last session of the day, where's my list? Hold on, I have it. For our 4 p.m. game, set, and match clinician learning styles across the generations. Coming on at 4 o'clock, there should be a link right on the live page. You can click to watch that one. A reminder that archive of this session and all of our sessions today can be found on the agenda page of the website. They'll eventually be moved over to the archive section. And a big thank you to Array for sponsoring the archive. And with that, I will wrap everything up. Thanks again to Jim and the rest of the panel. Great session. And thanks, everyone. And enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.